Richard Caldwell slid the forged contract across the table and smiled, and in his head, he was already counting the $200 million he was about to rip out of Vincent Moretti's hands. He'd faked the ships. He'd buried the debt. He'd bribed, forged, and lied his way into a trap so perfect that 20 of the smartest experts in America had signed off on it. Tonight, he would gut a Mafia king with a single piece of paper and walk out clean. Vincent's hand was already reaching for the pen, and then a waitress nobody had bothered to look at opened her mouth and said 2 words that detonated everything. Before we begin, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I want to see how far this story has traveled. The private dining room of the Black Orchid had gone silent in a way that money usually prevents. Money buys noise. Money buys laughter and clinking glasses and the easy confidence of men who have never once been afraid of a locked door. But tonight, 20 of the most expensive minds in the country sat around a long table, and not one of them was making a sound. Vincent Moretti sat at the head of that table, and he was the reason for the silence. He was 36 years old, and he did not look like the man the newspapers whispered about. He wore no rings, he raised no voice. He had never in his life needed to slam a fist on a table to be understood. The men who worked for him had learned something over the years that had cost several of them dearly to learn. When Vincent Moretti went quiet, that was the moment to be afraid. And right now, Vincent was very, very quiet. In front of him lay a stack of paper worth $200 million. An acquisition agreement, the kind of document that could take his family's dying logistics company, a company built on decades of things nobody talked about, and turn it into something clean, something legal, something his mother could have been proud of before she passed. The deal would hand him control of one of the largest shipping networks on the entire East Coast. Warehouses, ports, fleets of vessels moving cargo up and down the coastline like blood through veins. It was the deal of his life. Everybody at the table had told him so. "Tell me again," Vincent said. His voice was low and even. "Tell me why this is safe." Across the table, a lawyer named David Kessler cleared his throat. Kessler had spent 30 years on Wall Street. He had structured deals for men whose names were carved into the sides of buildings. He straightened his tie before he spoke, a habit he'd never broken. "Mr. Moretti, I understand the caution. I do. A number this large, a seller this famous, it makes anyone nervous. But I have personally reviewed every clause. My team has reviewed every clause. The representations and warranties are airtight. If anything is hidden in here, we would have found it." "Would you?" Vincent said. It wasn't a question. "We did," Kessler said. "We found nothing, because there's nothing to find." Vincent turned his eyes to the woman sitting 3 seats down. Her name was Sandra Ellis, and she had once worked for the federal government, hunting down exactly the kind of fraud that ruined empires. Vincent had paid a great deal of money to take her away from public service. He trusted her instincts more than he trusted most people's loyalty. "Sandra," he said, "you've put men in prison for hiding a single fake invoice. Tell me what you see." Sandra Ellis did not straighten her tie because she wasn't wearing one, and she did not clear her throat because she never wasted movement. She looked at Vincent with the flat, tired honesty of a person who had learned long ago that lying to Vincent Moretti was a poor career choice. "I see a clean deal," she said. "And I'll be honest with you, Vincent, that's what bothers me too. In my experience, nothing is ever this clean. But I've looked. I've looked harder than I've ever looked at anything, and I can't find the knife. If it's there, it's buried deeper than I can dig." That was the answer that scared Vincent the most, because Sandra Ellis was the one person in the room who spoke his language. She wasn't telling him the deal was safe. She was telling him she couldn't prove it was dangerous. And to Vincent, those two things had never once been the same. At the far end of the table, the man who had brought them all together leaned back in his chair and let the silence work for him. Richard Caldwell, 60 years old, a billionaire, a man who had never, not one time in his public life, been caught on the wrong side of a deal. The financial world called him a magician, because he made money appear where other men only saw ruin. He wore a suit that probably cost more than the waitstaff at the Black Orchid earned in a year, and he wore it the way some men wear armor. "Vincent," Caldwell said, and his voice was smooth as poured cream. "May I call you Vincent?" "You may not," Vincent said. Caldwell laughed as though that were the funniest thing he'd heard all week. "Fair enough. Mr. Moretti, I've watched you sit there for 2 hours now staring at that contract like it's going to bite you, and I want you to know, I respect caution. I built my entire fortune on caution. But there comes a point where caution becomes something else. There comes a point where a man is simply afraid of his own good luck." "Is that what this is?" Vincent said. "Luck." "This is opportunity," Caldwell said. "I'm an old man, Mr. Moretti. I'm tired. I've spent 40 years building shipping routes up and down this coast, and I have no son to leave them to and no patience left to run them myself. I want to sell. I want to sell to someone who will use it, and yes, I'm offering it below market. You want to know why? Because I would rather sell it cheap to a man with fire in him than sell it fair to a coward who'll let it rot." It was a beautiful speech. Vincent had to admit that. Every word of it was designed to slip past the mind and go straight for the pride. Caldwell hadn't offered him a deal. He'd offered him a dare. And the terrible thing was, it was working. Vincent could feel it working. He could feel the pull of it in his own chest, the voice that whispered, "Sign it, prove you're not afraid." "The deadline is midnight," Caldwell added softly. "I have other buyers. I told you that at the beginning, and I meant it. At 1 minute past 12, this offer is gone, and it does not come back. I am not a man who negotiates twice." Vincent looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:41, 19 minutes. He looked back down at the contract, at the pen resting beside it, at the small blank line waiting for his name. 20 experts had told him it was safe. The one expert he trusted most had told him she couldn't find the danger. And something in Vincent's gut, that old animal instinct that had kept him alive in rooms far worse than this one, was screaming at him that he was about to make the worst mistake of his life. "Give me a minute," Vincent said. "You have 19 of them," Caldwell said pleasantly. Vincent picked up the pen. He didn't sign. He just held it, feeling the weight of it, and stared at the paper as if he could burn a hole through it with willpower alone. He had been in danger before. He had walked into rooms where other men had walked out in bags, but he had always been able to see the shape of the threat. He could see a lie in a man's shoulders. He could hear a betrayal in the half-second pause before someone said your name. But paper didn't have shoulders. Paper didn't pause. And that was why, for the first time in years, Vincent Moretti was afraid. Nobody in that room was paying attention to the door. Nobody except a woman none of them had bothered to look at. Her name was Emily Parker, and she was 27 years old, and she was holding a silver coffee pot that had gone lukewarm in her hands. Emily had been working at the Black Orchid for 11 months. She worked doubles whenever she could get them, because doubles meant rent, and rent meant her mother stayed in the small apartment on the north side instead of somewhere worse. She had learned in those 11 months how to become invisible. It was a skill, being invisible. The rich people who filled these private rooms did not want to see her. They wanted the coffee to appear, and the plates to disappear, and the human being in between to make no impression at all. And Emily had gotten very good at giving them exactly that. She was not supposed to be in this room tonight. The regular server for private functions, a young man named Tomas, had called in sick, and the manager had grabbed Emily by the elbow 40 minutes ago and hissed at her that these were important people, the most important people, and that she was to keep their coffee full and her mouth shut. She had every intention of doing exactly that. She refilled a cup for the man in the expensive gray suit. He didn't look at her. She refilled a cup for the woman with the tired eyes. She didn't look at Emily either, but there was something less cold about the way she didn't look, and Emily noticed it. The way she noticed everything. Then she moved to refill the coffee of the man at the head of the table, the dangerous one, the one who made the whole room hold its breath. She kept her eyes down. She reached for his cup, and that was when her gaze slid across the open contract on the table in front of him. She wasn't trying to read it. She wasn't the kind of person who read other people's papers. But Emily's eyes had a mind of their own when it came to numbers, and always had. Ever since she was a little girl who could add a grocery bill in her head faster than the cashier could scan it. The page facing up was a shipping inventory, a list of vessels, names, tonnage, dates, registration numbers. Emily's eyes landed on one line, and something in the back of her mind quietly said, "That's wrong." She almost kept pouring. She almost said nothing. But her eyes went back, the way a tongue goes back to a chipped tooth, and she looked again at the registration number beside a ship the document described as newly built and recently upgraded. The number was wrong. Not wrong like a typo, wrong like a lie. Emily had spent 2 years, before her life fell apart, studying forensic accounting at one of the best programs in Chicago. She had been at the very top of her class. Her professors had called her a natural, a once-in-a-decade student who could see the fingerprints a liar left on a page. She had planned to spend her life catching exactly the kind of people who thought numbers couldn't be read like a face. And then her father had been accused of a financial crime he did not commit. And the accusation alone had been enough to break him, to drain the family's savings on lawyers, to put her mother in a hospital bed with a heart that couldn't take the shame. Emily had walked away from school without finishing because there was no money and no time and no one else to hold what was left of her family together, so she carried coffee now. But the gift didn't go away just because she stopped using it. The gift was still there, humming under the surface, and right now it was wide awake and pointing at a registration number that could not possibly belong to the ship it was attached to. A vessel registration number, she knew, carried its own history. The sequence itself told you when a ship had entered the registry. And the number in front of her belonged to a decade that had ended long before this new ship supposedly existed. You could not put a brand new ship into service wearing the identification code of a vessel built when Emily was in grade school. It was like a 20-year-old showing up with a birth certificate from the wrong century. Emily's heart began to beat faster. She let her eyes drift, just slightly, to the next page, a corner of which was visible beneath the first. An environmental compliance certificate. Federal approval for the fleet's emission standards, the kind of document that took months to obtain and cost fortunes to falsify. There was a date stamped at the top, the date the certificate had been issued. Emily knew that date. She knew it because it was a federal holiday. She knew it because 2 years ago, on that exact holiday, her father had tried and failed to reach a government office to submit a document that might have saved him, and he had come home gray-faced and told his family that the whole federal government shuts its doors on that day every year, and nobody had told him. No federal office issued certificates on that date. No federal office was even open on that date, which meant the certificate in front of Vincent Moretti was a forgery, which meant the inventory was a forgery, which meant the whole beautiful, airtight $200 million deal was a beautiful, airtight $200 million trap. Emily stood there with the coffee pot in her hands and felt the floor tilt underneath her. "This is not my problem." She actually said it to herself. In her own head, in her mother's voice. "This is not your problem, Emily. You pour the coffee, you take your check, you go home. These are dangerous people playing a dangerous game, and you are a waitress, and nobody in this room will thank you for opening your mouth. They will laugh at you. Or worse." She started to turn away. She got one full step toward the door, and then behind her, she heard the small, dry sound of a man picking up a pen. Emily turned back around. Vincent Moretti had the pen in his hand. He had it poised over the signature line. His jaw was set, and his eyes had the look of a man who had decided to stop listening to the voice in his gut and start listening to the 20 voices telling him he was safe. He was going to sign. One signature. 1 second. And this man, whoever he really was, whatever he really did, was going to hand $200 million to a smiling liar in exchange for a fleet of ghost ships and a mountain of buried debt. And Emily thought about her father. She thought about a man who had been destroyed by exactly this kind of paper, exactly this kind of lie. She thought about how nobody had listened to him either, how the experts and the lawyers and the men in expensive suits had all looked at the documents and shrugged and said the numbers are clean, and how her father had spent the last good years of his life screaming into a silence that refused to hear him. She would not be the silence. Not tonight. "Don't sign." The words came out of her before she had decided to say them. They came out clear and loud, far louder than she had meant, and they hit the room like a rock through a window. Vincent's pen stopped a half inch above the paper. Every head at the table turned. 20 of the most important people in the city turned in their chairs and stared at the waitress standing by the door with a coffee pot in her hands. The manager, hovering near the wall, made a sound like a man who had just watched his career die. For a long, terrible moment, nobody said anything at all. Then David Kessler, the Wall Street lawyer, laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has spent his whole life at the top of the table looking down, and who has just been interrupted by someone from the very bottom. "I'm sorry," he said, and he was already half rising from his seat, already turning toward the manager. "Is this a joke? Who let the help into a private negotiation? Get her out of here." "She's leaving," the manager stammered. "Emily, put down the pot and go right now. I am so sorry, Mr. Moretti. Please, she's leaving. This will never—" "Stop." It was Vincent. He had not raised his voice. He never did. But the single word landed on the room like a hand on the back of the neck, and everyone froze, the manager mid-sentence, Kessler half out of his chair. Vincent had not taken his eyes off Emily. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a card that has just been turned over. There was no anger in his face. There was something far more dangerous than anger. There was interest. "Sit down, Mr. Kessler," Vincent said quietly. Kessler sat. Vincent set the pen down on the table, very deliberately, so that everyone could see he had set it down. Then he turned his full attention to the woman by the door, and when he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "Explain." Emily's mouth had gone completely dry. Her hands were shaking around the coffee pot. Every instinct she had was telling her to drop it and run, to disappear back into the invisibility that had kept her safe for 11 months. But she had come too far now. She had already thrown the rock. There was nothing left to do but stand in the broken glass. She set the coffee pot down on the sideboard. She was surprised to find that her hands steadied the moment they were empty, the moment they had a job to do that her gift understood. "The contract is fake," Emily said. The room erupted. Not in shouting. These were not shouting people. It erupted in scoffs, in disbelieving little huffs of breath, in the low murmur of 20 experts insulted all at once. Sandra Ellis said nothing, but her tired eyes had narrowed, and she was watching Emily with a new and careful attention. At the end of the table, Richard Caldwell had gone very still. To anyone else, he looked amused. He wore the same easy smile he'd worn all evening. But Emily, who read faces the way she read numbers, saw the smile stop climbing before it reached his eyes. She saw his hand, resting on the table, close very slowly into a loose fist. He was afraid. For just 1 second, the magician was afraid, and that told Emily everything she needed to know. She had been right. She was right. "You expect us to believe," Kessler said, his voice dripping, "that a waitress just discovered something 20 professionals missed? 20! Do you have any idea what the people at this table are paid? Do you have any idea what our time is worth? And you want us to believe you looked at a contract for 4 seconds while pouring coffee and cracked it wide open?" "Yes," Emily said. The simplicity of it stopped him cold. "I do," she said, "because I didn't need 4 hours. I needed 1 line." "Which line?" Vincent said. Emily walked to the table. She was aware of every eye on her, aware of the manager's horrified face, aware that she was doing the single most reckless thing she had ever done in her life. But her hands were steady, and her mind was clear, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt like herself again. "May I?" she said, and she reached toward the contract. Vincent nodded once. She turned the top page so the whole table could see the shipping inventory. She put her finger on the line that had first snagged her eye. "This vessel," she said, "you've listed it as new, recently built, recently upgraded. But look at the registration number. This code doesn't belong to a new ship. This sequence was issued years ago, decades ago. A brand new vessel physically cannot carry this registration, because this number was assigned to the registry long before this ship was supposedly built. It's like handing you a photograph of a teenager and telling you it was taken before the boy was born." The table was quiet now. "That could be a clerical error," Kessler said, but the venom had drained out of his voice. "It could be," Emily agreed. "1 line could be a clerical error, so let's look at 2. She turned the next page. The environmental certificate. This is a federal compliance certificate, she said. Emissions approval for the whole fleet. It's stamped with an issue date, right here at the top. She tapped it. I want you to look at that date very carefully, and I want one of you, any of you, to tell me what happened on that date. Nobody moved. It's a federal holiday, Emily said. The offices were closed, every single one of them, nationwide. There was not a single government employee at a single desk to issue a single certificate that day. It is not possible for this document to exist. It was not issued on that date. It was never issued at all. Somebody made it, and they made it carelessly, and they picked a date without checking a calendar because they never once imagined anyone at this table would think to check. She looked up. I checked, she said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Sandra Ellis was the first to move. She reached across the table, pulled the contract toward herself, and began typing rapidly on the phone in her other hand. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. Everyone watched the former government investigator run the numbers, because everyone in that room understood that Sandra Ellis did not care about anyone's pride, including her own, and that whatever she said next would be the truth. For nearly a minute, the only sound was the soft tap of her fingers. Then Sandra Ellis went pale. She looked up from her phone. She looked at Emily first, and there was something in her expression that Emily had not expected. It was respect. Raw, startled respect. Then she turned to Vincent. She's right, Sandra said. The room did not erupt this time. The room went absolutely silent, the silence of 20 people all realizing at the same instant that the ground had opened beneath them. The registration number cross-references to a decommissioned vessel, Sandra said, her voice flat and fast and professional. Not a new ship, a ship that was pulled out of service years ago, and the certificate date is a federal holiday. I confirmed it. The issuing office was closed. This document is fraudulent, Vincent. And if these two are fake, then I would bet my entire career that everything under them is fake too. Vincent Moretti did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked down the length of the table at Richard Caldwell. Caldwell had stopped smiling. Richard, Vincent said. His voice was very soft now, softer than it had been all night, and that was the most frightening it had sounded yet. The waitress found your knife in 4 seconds. My people looked for 4 hours and found nothing. Would you like to explain that to me? Caldwell recovered fast. Emily had to give him that. In half a heartbeat, the smile came back, oiled and easy, and he spread his hands as though the whole thing were a delightful misunderstanding. Vincent, come now. Clerical errors. Sloppy paperwork from my back office. You know how these things are. A registration transposed, a date mistyped. You're going to blow up a $200 million opportunity because a serving girl got lucky with a coincidence? She didn't get lucky, Sandra Ellis said flatly. I've spent 20 years doing exactly what she just did, and I missed it. She didn't. And it's not a coincidence, Emily said. She should have stopped there. She knew she should have stopped there. But she had spent 2 years being silent, 2 years watching liars like this walk free while men like her father were crushed under the weight of paper, and something in her had come loose tonight and would not go back into its box. You're not selling a shipping company, Mr. Caldwell, Emily said, and her voice did not shake at all. You're selling a corpse in a nice suit, ghost ships that don't run, vessels that were pulled out of service and dressed back up on paper. And underneath all of it, I would guess, decades of hidden debt and government penalties that transfer the second someone signs. You weren't offering him a bargain. You were offering him a bomb, and you set the fuse for midnight so he wouldn't have time to think. For 1 second, one single, unguarded second, Richard Caldwell looked at Emily Parker with an expression of pure, undisguised hatred. And then it was gone, and the smile was back, and he was rising from his chair and buttoning his jacket with the calm of a man who has decided the game is over. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by the help, he said. The offer stands until midnight, Vincent. Sign it or don't. But you'll be throwing away the best deal of your life on the word of a girl who pours coffee. Vincent Moretti reached out and picked up the contract. For one moment, it seemed like he might actually read it again, that he might weigh it, that the pull of $200 million and the sting of a public dare might still somehow win. Instead, he took the thick stack of paper in both hands and he tore it in half. The sound of it ripping was enormous in the silent room. He tore it again. and again. And then he let the pieces fall onto the table in front of him like the leaves of a dead tree. 20 experts, Vincent said quietly, not looking at Caldwell, not looking at anyone but the torn paper in front of him. Millions of dollars in advice, the best minds money can buy sitting at my table. He finally raised his eyes, and the person who saved me was the woman carrying the coffee. Richard Caldwell stood frozen for a moment. Whatever he had planned for this night, it had not been this. Emily watched the calculation run behind his eyes, watched him decide there was nothing left to salvage, watched the mask of the friendly billionaire dissolve into something colder and much older. "You're making a mistake, Vincent," Caldwell said, and there was no warmth left in it at all. "A very large one." "No," Vincent said. "For the first time tonight, I'm not." Caldwell's gaze slid one last time to Emily. He said nothing to her. He didn't need to. The look was enough. It was a look that promised she had just made an enemy she could not afford, that she had stepped into a war between titans and picked the wrong moment to become visible. Then he walked out of the room, and the door closed behind him, and the deal that could have destroyed an empire was lying in pieces on the table. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Vincent Moretti stood up, and he did something that made every person at that table stare in disbelief. He walked around the table, past the lawyers and the executives and the investigators who had missed what a waitress had caught, and he stopped in front of Emily Parker, and he looked at her, not the way a powerful man looks at the help, but the way one person looks at another when they have just been seen for the first time in a very long time. "What is your name?" he asked. Emily's throat was tight. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last 5 minutes was starting to drain, and underneath it she could feel the enormous, dizzying weight of what she had just done. "Emily," she said. "Emily Parker." "Emily Parker," Vincent said, and he said it slowly, as though he were memorizing it. "Do you understand what you just did?" "I stopped you from signing a bad contract," she said. "You saved me $200 million, Vincent said. "You saved me my company. You saved me my freedom, probably, because if I'd signed that, the liabilities that transferred to me would have put me in a courtroom I could not have talked my way out of." He shook his head slowly, and something like wonder crossed his face. "In 4 seconds, while pouring coffee." "I used to study this," Emily heard herself say. "Before, a long time ago." "Study what?" "Forensic accounting. I could always see it, the way numbers lie." She looked away. "It didn't do my family much good." Something shifted in Vincent's eyes when she said that. A flicker of something she couldn't name. He didn't ask her what she meant, not then. But Emily would learn, much later, that Vincent Moretti forgot nothing, and that in that exact moment he had already begun to wonder about the wound in her voice when she said the word family. Because here is what Emily didn't know yet, standing in that room with her heart still hammering and a torn contract at her feet. She didn't know that the man who had built that trap, the man who had just walked out promising her ruin, was connected by a thread she could not yet see to the same catastrophe that had destroyed her father 2 years before. She didn't know that Richard Caldwell's name was buried, deep and quiet, in the paperwork that had sent her family into the dark. She didn't know that by opening her mouth in that room, by refusing to be the silence, she had not just saved a stranger's fortune. She had picked up a loose end of the very thread that had unraveled her own life, and she had started, without meaning to pull. Vincent studied her face for a long moment. Then he glanced back at the table, at the 20 stunned professionals who had not said a word, at Sandra Ellis, who was still looking at Emily like she'd seen a ghost do arithmetic. "Go home tonight, Miss Parker," Vincent said. "Finish your shift. Take your check." Emily blinked, thrown by the ordinariness of it. "That's it?" "That's it," Vincent said. "For tonight." And then, so quietly that only she could hear it, he added, "Tomorrow is going to be different." He turned and walked back to the head of the table, and Emily picked up her coffee pot with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and she walked out of the room she was never supposed to enter, past the manager who was staring at her as though she had grown a second head. She had no idea that a car would be waiting outside her apartment in the morning. She had no idea that the offer she was about to receive would change everything. And she had no idea, none at all, that somewhere across the city, Richard Caldwell was already on the phone, already making calls, already saying a single sentence into the dark that would set the entire rest of this story into motion. Find out everything about the waitress. The car was black, and it was waiting at the curb outside Emily Parker's building at 7:15 in the morning, and she knew before she reached the bottom of the stairs that it was there for her. She had not slept. She had lain awake most of the night replaying the moment she said the words, "Don't sign," hearing them over and over in the dark of her small room, feeling the way the whole world had tilted when 20 faces turned to look at her. Part of her had convinced herself it was a dream. Part of her had convinced herself she'd imagined the way Vincent Moretti had said her name, slowly, like it mattered. And then she looked out her window at dawn and saw the black car, and she knew it hadn't been a dream at all. Her mother was awake in the next room. Emily could hear the soft rasp of her breathing, the sound that had ruled Emily's whole life for 2 years now, the sound that meant her mother's heart was still tired, still weak, still costing more to keep going than Emily could really afford. She pulled her coat on quietly. She did not want her mother to worry. Her mother did enough worrying for 3 people. A man in a dark suit stepped out of the driver's seat as Emily came through the front door of the building. He was big, but he moved carefully, the way careful men move, and he did not reach for her or crowd her. "Ms. Parker," he said, "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. He asked me to say that you're free to refuse. He asked me to say those exact words. You are free to refuse, and I'll drive away, and no one will ever bother you again." Emily stood on the sidewalk in the cold and thought about how strange it was that a man like Vincent Moretti would send a message like that. "And if I don't refuse," she said. "Then I take you to breakfast," the man said. "That's all. Breakfast." Emily looked back up at the window of the apartment where her mother slept. She thought about the double shifts. She thought about the rent that was always a little more than she had. She thought about the medicine that cost what it cost, whether they could pay for it or not. Then she got in the car. The place he took her was not a restaurant she would ever have walked into on her own. It was quiet, and it was expensive, and there was exactly 1 table occupied when she arrived, and Vincent Moretti was sitting at it. He stood when she came in. Emily had not expected that either. Men like him did not stand for women who poured their coffee. "Ms. Parker," he said, "thank you for coming. Please sit." She sat. A waiter appeared and vanished. Vincent waited until they were alone before he spoke again, and when he did not waste time. "I'm going to offer you a job," he said. "And before I do, I'm going to tell you the truth about who I am, because you've probably heard things, and I'd rather you heard it from me." "I've heard things," Emily admitted. "Most of them are true," Vincent said. He said it plainly, without shame and without pride, the way a man states his weight or his height. "My family built its money in ways I'm not going to describe to you over breakfast. For a long time, that was simply the way things were. It was the world I was born into, but I've spent the last several years trying to drag that empire into the light, trying to make it legal, clean, something that could survive without the things that built it." He paused. "That deal last night was supposed to be the biggest step I'd ever taken toward that, a legitimate shipping network, a clean future, and instead it was a trap, and I nearly walked into it, and the only reason I didn't is sitting across this table from me." Emily said nothing. She was waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. "I have 20 people on my payroll who are supposed to catch things like that," Vincent went on. "Lawyers, investigators, a former federal agent who is very, very good at her job, and every one of them missed what you saw while you were pouring coffee. So I'm not going to insult you by pretending this is charity, Ms. Parker. It isn't. I want to hire you because you are, as far as I can tell, better at this than anyone I already pay." "Hire me to do what?" Emily said carefully. "Head of Internal Investigations," Vincent said. Emily actually laughed. It came out sharp and disbelieving before she could stop it. "I'm a waitress," she said. "I dropped out of school. I don't have a degree. I don't have references. 24 hours ago, you didn't know I existed." "You studied forensic accounting," Vincent said. "You told me that last night. Top of your class, I'd guess, from the way you moved through that contract." He leaned forward slightly. "I don't care about a piece of paper on a wall, Miss Parker. I care about what you can do. And I watched what you can do." Emily's laugh died. She looked down at the table. Here was the thing she had not told him, the thing she had not told anyone in 2 years. She had wanted this. God, she had wanted it. She had spent 2 years carrying trays and clearing plates, and every single time she saw a number that didn't add up, some part of her had lit up and then gone dark again, because there was no room in her life for the thing she was good at. There was only room for survival. And now a dangerous man was offering her the thing she'd buried, and she was so afraid of how badly she wanted it that her hands started to shake again. "Why me?" she said quietly. "Really, you could hire anyone." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "Because you had every reason to stay silent," he said. "Everyone in that room outranked you. Everyone in that room could have made your life miserable for speaking up. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to pour the coffee and walk away. And you didn't." He held her eyes. "I've spent my whole life around people who tell me what I want to hear because they're afraid of me. You weren't afraid of what it would cost you to tell me the truth. That's the rarest thing I've ever seen in a person. I'm not going to let it walk back out to a diner." Emily sat with that for a long moment, and then, because he had been honest with her, she decided to be honest back. "If I take this," she said, "there are conditions. Name them." "I only work on legal business. I'm not going to be your accountant for anything I'd go to prison for. If you want me to bury bodies on paper, find someone else." "Agreed," Vincent said without hesitation. "I won't help you hurt people. Not with numbers, not with anything. I've seen what happens to a person's life when the numbers get used against them. My father—" She stopped, swallowed. "I've seen it. I won't be the one who does it to somebody else." "Agreed," Vincent said again, and something in his face had gone very still and attentive when she said the word father. "And I make my own calls," Emily said. "If I find something, I tell you the truth, even when you don't want to hear it, especially when you don't want to hear it. If you want a yes woman, I'm not her. That's the whole reason you're sitting here, isn't it? Because everyone else said yes. If you hire me and then tell me to shut up the first time I say something you don't like, then you didn't actually learn anything last night." For a moment, Vincent Moretti just looked at her, and then he did something Emily would remember for a long time afterward. He smiled. Not the cold, controlled expression he'd worn at the table the night before. An actual smile, surprised out of him, the smile of a man who had just been talked to like a human being for the first time in longer than he could remember. "You know," he said, "most people would never speak to me the way you just did." "Most people are afraid of you," Emily said. "You're not?" "I'm terrified of you," Emily said honestly. "But I've been broke and invisible for 2 years, Mr. Moretti, and I've learned that being afraid and being honest can happen at the same time. If they couldn't, I never would have opened my mouth last night." Vincent extended his hand across the table. "Emily Parker," he said, "welcome to the company." And that was how the woman who had been invisible 11 hours earlier shook hands with one of the most powerful men in the country and agreed to hunt down the truth for a living. She had no idea what she was about to find. Her first day, they gave her an office, an actual office with a door that closed and a window that looked out over the city, and Emily stood in it for a full minute after they left her alone, just breathing, just trying to make her body believe that this was real. Then she sat down at the desk and she got to work, because she did not know how to do anything halfway. Sandra Ellis was assigned to work with her. Emily had braced for resentment. She had figured the former federal agent would hate taking direction from a college dropout who'd been carrying coffee the day before. But Sandra surprised her. "I missed it," Sandra said, on that first morning, sitting across from Emily with 2 cups of the terrible office coffee between them. "The registration number, the certificate date. I looked at that contract for 4 hours and I missed it, and you caught it in 4 seconds. I've been doing this for 20 years, Ms. Parker, and I don't have an ego about it. If you're better than me, then I want to learn from you, and I want to catch the next one before somebody like Caldwell walks it through the door. So let's not waste time pretending I'm too proud to work under you. I'm not. Where do we start?" Emily felt something loosen in her chest. She hadn't realized how ready she'd been for a fight. "We start with Caldwell," Emily said. That deal wasn't a one-time thing. Nobody builds a trap that elaborate for a single mark. A man who forges federal certificates and dresses up decommissioned ships has done it before. I want to know how many times. I want to know who else he's done it to. Sandra nodded slowly, and something in her eyes sharpened. You want to go after him, she said. I want to understand him, Emily said. There's a difference. You don't take down a man like Richard Caldwell by charging at him. You take him down by understanding exactly how he thinks, and then letting him walk into the trap he built for someone else. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. You're going to be very good at this, she said. They spent the first 2 weeks buried in paper. Emily requested everything the company had on Caldwell, every past interaction, every deal his name had ever brushed against. She wanted the shape of the man, and slowly, line by line, number by number, that shape began to emerge, and it was uglier than she'd imagined. Caldwell didn't just cheat people, he selected them. He found companies that were struggling, family businesses on the edge, men who were desperate enough to want to believe in a miracle. And then he offered them the miracle, the impossible deal, the too-good-to-be-true bargain, and he timed it with a deadline so tight they couldn't think straight. He'd done it a dozen times that Emily could trace. Small companies mostly. Companies too small and too ashamed to fight back when they realized what had happened to them. He drained them and moved on, and he'd gotten very rich doing it, and he'd never once been caught, because the men he ruined were too broken and too embarrassed to stand up in a courtroom and admit they'd been fooled. Emily recognized the pattern the way you recognize a face in a crowd. She had seen it before, she had lived inside it, and that was when she found the thing that stopped her cold. It was late, past 9 at night, the office empty except for the hum of the lights. Emily was going through an old file, a company Caldwell had gutted 3 years earlier, when a name caught her eye in the fine print of a subsidiary. A small accounting firm that had been used to process one of Caldwell's fraudulent valuations. The name of the firm was one Emily knew. It was the firm her father had worked for. Emily sat very still. For a moment she thought she'd misread it. She read it again, and again, but the words did not change. Her father's old firm, the firm he had given 20 years of his life to, the firm that had accused him of a financial crime and thrown him to the wolves, had once processed a valuation for Richard Caldwell. Emily's hands had gone cold. She pulled the file apart. She stopped being tired. She stopped being anything except the thing she was best at in the world, the thing that could see the fingerprints a liar left on a page. And she followed the numbers back, transaction by transaction, year by year, and slowly, terribly, a picture began to form. Her father had not committed a crime. He had discovered one. 2 years ago, her father had been working on a routine account, and he had stumbled onto a valuation that didn't add up. Numbers that lied. The exact kind of thing Emily herself had caught in 4 seconds at the Black Orchid. And her father, being an honest man, being the kind of man who could not let a lie sit once he'd seen it, had started asking questions, and someone had needed him silenced. So they had taken the very fraud he'd discovered, and they had turned it around, and they had made it look like he was the one who'd committed it. They had buried him under his own honesty. They had made the man who found the crime look like the man who did it. And it had worked, because who would believe him? Who listens to a mid-level accountant screaming that he's innocent? The experts had looked at the paperwork and shrugged and said the numbers point to him, and her father's life had ended right there, in a silence that refused to hear him. Emily was crying. She didn't notice she was crying until a tear hit the file and she had to move the paper so it wouldn't smear. Because now she understood what she'd been circling for 2 weeks. The pattern she'd recognized, the face in the crowd, the reason Caldwell's methods had felt so sickeningly familiar to her, the account her father had discovered the fraud in. It was one of Caldwell's. Richard Caldwell was the man who had destroyed her family. Not directly, not with his own hands. Caldwell never used his own hands, but it was his fraud her father had found. It was his people who had needed her, father silenced. It was his machine that had chewed up an honest man and spit out a ruined one, and it was his shadow that had fallen across Emily's whole life for 2 years, and she hadn't even known his name until 3 weeks ago, when he slid a pen across a table and smiled, She sat in that empty office until nearly midnight, staring at the proof of it, feeling 2 years of grief and rage and helplessness come roaring up all at once. And then, because she was her father's daughter, she wiped her face, and she made a copy of everything, and she started to build a case. She did not tell Vincent. Not yet. She wasn't ready. She needed to be sure, absolutely sure, before she brought something like this to a man like him, because she knew what a man like Vincent Moretti might do with the knowledge that Richard Caldwell had a personal blade already lodged in Emily's back. She didn't want revenge to make her careless. Her father had taught her that. The numbers don't lie, he used to say, but people who are angry stop reading them carefully. So she stayed careful, she stayed quiet, and she kept digging. 3 days later, she found the second thing. And the second thing was worse than the first. She had been cross-referencing the fraudulent deals, trying to understand how Caldwell always seemed to know exactly which companies to target and exactly when they were most vulnerable. And a pattern emerged that she didn't want to see. Caldwell knew things he shouldn't have known. In the case of Vincent's own near miss, Caldwell had known the exact state of the company's finances. He'd known how badly Vincent wanted a legitimate future. He'd known the precise pressures that would make Vincent reach for a deal that looked too good to be true. He'd known which strings to pull, because someone had handed him the strings. Someone inside Vincent's own company was feeding Richard Caldwell information. Emily checked it 3 times before she let herself believe it. But the pattern was undeniable. The leaks were too specific, too timed, too perfectly aimed. This wasn't Caldwell being a good guesser. This was a traitor, someone close to Vincent, someone trusted, someone who sat at that table, or near it, and who had been quietly selling Vincent out to the very man trying to destroy him. And this, Emily could not keep to herself. She went to Vincent's office the next morning. She had barely slept. Sandra came with her because Sandra had helped confirm the pattern and because Emily wanted a witness who couldn't be dismissed. Vincent listened to all of it without interrupting. That was one of the things Emily was learning about him. He didn't perform. He didn't react for show. He simply absorbed, his face perfectly still, until she was finished. "You're telling me," he said finally, "that someone inside my company has been feeding Caldwell information." "Yes," Emily said. "For how long?" "At least 2 years, from what I can trace. Maybe longer." Vincent was silent for a long moment, and Emily watched something move behind his eyes, something cold and slow and terrible, the anger of a man who trusted almost no one and had just learned that one of the few he did trust had betrayed him. "Do you know who?" he said. "Not yet," Emily said. "The leaks are careful. Whoever it is knows how to cover their tracks, but I can narrow it. It has to be someone with access to the financials, the deal terms, and the internal strategy. That's a very short list of people, Mr. Moretti. A dozen, maybe. And I can find the exact one, but I need time, and I need you to not tip your hand. If the traitor knows we're looking, they'll go quiet, and we'll lose our shot at proving anything." "How much time?" Vincent said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Vincent stood up. He walked to the window, and he looked out over the city for a long moment. And when he turned back around, his face had settled into something Emily had not seen on it before. A decision. "You have 3 weeks, he said. "You have anything you need, money, access, people, but Emily." He fixed her with a look. "When you find the name, you come to me first, not to anyone else, just me. Because a leak this deep means I don't know who I can trust in my own house, and until you tell me otherwise, I'm going to assume the answer is almost no one." "I understand," Emily said. "Do you?" Vincent said quietly. "Because here's what I need you to understand, Miss Parker. Whoever this is, they've been in the room with me. They've eaten at my table, they've shaken my hand, and they've been selling me to the man who tried to bury me. When you find them, they are going to be someone I care about. That's how betrayal works. It's never the person you'd suspect. It's always the person you'd defend." His jaw tightened. "So I need you to be certain, not confident. Certain. Because I am going to act on what you bring me, and if you're wrong, I might destroy an innocent person, and if you're right—" He stopped. "If I'm right," Emily said, "then I'm going to have to decide what to do with someone who broke my trust," Vincent said. and that is not going to be a good day for anyone." Emily left his office with the weight of that pressing down on her, and she got back to work. And over the next 2 weeks, she narrowed the list the way you narrow anything, by eliminating what it can't be until only the truth is left. She eliminated the ones without access. She eliminated the ones whose timelines didn't fit. She eliminated the ones who had been out of the country when key leaks occurred. One by one, the dozen became 8, became 5, became 3. And then, on a gray afternoon, working alone, she eliminated the second-to-last name, and she was left with one. Emily stared at the file for a long time, because the name that remained was not the name she'd expected. It was worse. It was so much worse. Michael Reynolds, Vincent's most trusted executive, his right hand, the man who had been with him longest, who had helped him try to build the legitimate future, who sat closer to Vincent than almost anyone alive, the man Vincent had called more than once, the only person in this company I don't have to watch. Michael Reynolds was the traitor. Emily went back through everything 3 more times because she remembered what Vincent had said. Certain, not confident. And every time she went through it, the answer came back the same. The leaks matched Reynolds' access. The timing matched Reynolds' schedule. And there, buried in a set of financial records Reynolds thought no one would ever cross-reference, were the payments. Careful, disguised, routed through shell companies and dressed up as consulting fees. But Emily could read the fingerprints, and the fingerprints were his. Michael Reynolds had been selling Vincent Moretti to Richard Caldwell for years, and Emily now had to walk into Vincent's office and tell the most dangerous man she'd ever met that the person he trusted most in the world had betrayed him. She found him alone, late, the office dark except for his desk lamp. He looked up when she came in, and he read her face the way he read everything, instantly and completely. "You found the name," he said. It wasn't a question. "I found the name," Emily said. Vincent set down his pen. He folded his hands on the desk, and he looked at her with a stillness that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Tell me," he said. Emily took a breath. "Before I do," she said, "I need you to remember what you told me. You said it would be someone you care about, someone you'd defend. I need you to remember you said that, because it's true, and because I need you to hear the whole thing before you do anything." Vincent's stillness deepened into something almost frightening. "Emily," he said very quietly, "say the name." And Emily, who had learned 2 years ago exactly what it cost to be the one who tells the truth when everyone would rather she stayed silent, looked Vincent Moretti in the eye and said it. "It's Michael Reynolds." For a long, long moment, Vincent did not move at all. And Emily watched the face of the most controlled man she had ever known begin slowly to change, and she understood that she had just detonated something that could not be undone. Vincent Moretti did not speak for a full minute. Emily had seen a lot of silences in her life. The silence of a hospital room at 3 in the morning. The silence of a father who has just been accused of something he didn't do. The silence of 20 experts realizing they'd been beaten by a waitress. But she had never seen a silence like this one. It had weight. It had temperature. It filled the office like water filling a sinking room, and Emily made herself stand inside it and not look away. "Say it again," Vincent said finally. "Michael Reynolds," Emily said. "He's the leak. He's been feeding Caldwell information for at least 2 years. The payments are disguised as consulting fees, routed through shell companies, but the fingerprints are his. He knew the exact state of your finances. He knew how badly you wanted the legitimate deal. He handed Caldwell every string, and Caldwell used them to build the trap." She paused. "The one you almost walked into. Michael built the road that led you to that table." Vincent stood up. He walked to the window, the way he did when he needed the city instead of a person to look at. And Emily watched his shoulders, because she had learned to read shoulders a long time ago, and his shoulders were telling her something his face refused to. "Michael was there when we buried my mother," Vincent said quietly. Emily said nothing. "He was 19, I was 21. We came up together. When I had nothing, when the family had nothing but a name and a lot of enemies, Michael was the one who stood next to me. He took a bullet from me once. Did you know that? An actual bullet. He's got the scar on his shoulder. He caught it that was meant for me, and he never once asked me for anything in return." Vincent's voice had gone very low. "And you're telling me he's been selling me to a man who tried to put me in prison?" "Yes," Emily said. "Are you certain?" There it was, the word he'd made her promise. Certain, not confident. "I'm certain," Emily said. "I checked it more times than I've ever checked anything. I wanted to be wrong. I want to be wrong right now, standing here, but the numbers don't lie, Mr. Moretti. People lie. Numbers just sit there and tell you the truth, whether you want it or not." She swallowed. "It's him. I'm sorry. It's him." Vincent turned around, and Emily saw that his eyes had gone somewhere she didn't want to follow. There was no shouting in them. There was no rage. There was something far more dangerous than either. There was calculation. The look of a man who had just learned that the ground he'd been standing on his whole life was not ground at all, and was already, coldly, deciding what to do about it. "Then he dies," Vincent said. The words landed in the room like a dropped stone. "No," Emily said. She said it before she'd thought about it. She said it the same way she'd said, "Don't sign 3 weeks earlier," the words coming out ahead of the fear. Vincent's eyes cut to her. "No?" he said very softly. "You're telling me no?" "I'm telling you it's the wrong move," Emily said, and her heart was slamming against her ribs, but she held her ground because she had promised him on the first day that she would tell him the truth, even when he didn't want to hear it. And this was the moment that promise came due. "You hired me to see what everyone else misses, so let me do my job. Let me show you what killing Michael Reynolds actually costs you." "He betrayed me." "Yes, he did," Emily said. "And if you kill him, here's what you get. You get a dead body and a dozen questions and a war with whoever Michael was really working with. And you get to become exactly the man you told me over breakfast you were trying to stop being. You told me you were dragging this whole empire into the light. You kill Michael, and you drag it right back into the dark, and you do it over a man who isn't even the real enemy." That stopped him. "Explain," Vincent said. "Michael is a symptom," Emily said. "Caldwell is the disease. You kill Michael, you feel better for about an hour, and then Caldwell just finds another Michael, another person on your payroll who's underpaid or in debt or scared, and he buys them, the same way he bought the last one. You'll have solved nothing. You'll have killed a man who used to take bullets for you, and Caldwell will still be out there, richer than you, laughing, because he made you do it. He turned your own hand against your oldest friend without lifting a finger. That's a win for him, Mr. Moretti. Don't hand him a win." Vincent was staring at her now with an intensity that would have frightened a lesser person into silence. But Emily had run out of the ability to be silent a long time ago. "Then what?" Vincent said. "You want me to forgive him? You want me to shake his hand and pretend I don't know?" "No," Emily said. "I want you to use him." Something flickered in Vincent's face. Interest. The same interest she'd seen the first night, when she said the contract was fake and he leaned forward instead of throwing her out. "Michael has been feeding Caldwell information for 2 years, Emily said. And now she was moving fast, because she could feel him listening, could feel the door opening. "That's a channel, Mr. Moretti. A direct line from the inside of your company straight into Caldwell's ear. Right now, Caldwell trusts that channel completely. He's been drinking from it for 2 years, and it's never once lied to him." She leaned forward. "So what happens if we control what goes into it?" Vincent went very still. "We turn Michael," Emily said. "We catch him, we corner him, and we give him one way out. He keeps feeding Caldwell information, but now it's information we choose. We feed Caldwell exactly what we want him to believe. We use Michael as the mouth and Caldwell as the ear, and we walk Caldwell into a trap he thinks is his own idea. The same thing he tried to do to you. We do it to him, and we do it legally, on paper, with evidence, so that when it's over, Caldwell doesn't end up dead. He ends up in a courtroom. He ends up exactly where he put my—" She stopped. She had almost said it, "where he put my father." Vincent caught it. Of course he caught it. He caught everything. "Where he put your what, Ms. Parker?" Vincent said quietly. And Emily realized that the moment had come, the moment she'd been putting off for 2 weeks, and that there was no way to walk it back now. She'd cracked the door and he'd seen through it, and Vincent Moretti did not unsee things. So she told him. She told him about her father, about the honest accountant who'd found a fraud he wasn't supposed to find, about how the fraud had been turned around and pinned on him, about how the experts had shrugged and said the numbers point to him, and how her father's life had ended in a silence that refused to hear him. And then she told him the part she'd been holding on to alone for 2 weeks, the part that had kept her awake at night. "The fraud my father found," Emily said, "was one of Caldwell's. It was his valuation, his scheme. My father found it, and Caldwell's people needed him gone, and so they destroyed him. Richard Caldwell is the reason I dropped out of school. He's the reason my mother's heart gave out. He's the reason I've spent 2 years carrying coffee instead of doing the thing I was born to do." Her voice cracked, and she let it, because there was no point pretending anymore. "The night I stopped you from signing that contract, I didn't know his name. I didn't know he was the man who ruined my family. I just saw a lie on a page and I couldn't let it go. And then I came to work for you, and I started pulling the thread, and the thread led straight back to the man who took everything from me." The office was silent. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face had changed. The cold calculation was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something Emily hadn't expected. Understanding. The recognition of one person who's been wronged, looking at another. "So, this is personal for you," Vincent said. "Yes," Emily said, "and that's exactly why you should listen to me when I tell you not to kill Michael. Because I want Caldwell more than you do. I want him more than I've ever wanted anything, and I'm telling you that killing your way to him is the wrong answer. I don't want him dead, Mr. Moretti. Dead is too easy. Dead is a mercy. I want him to sit in a courtroom and watch the numbers he thought he'd buried get read out loud, one by one, until there's nowhere left for him to hide. I want him to feel what my father felt, the silence closing in. Except this time the silence is going to be on his side of the table." For a long moment, Vincent said nothing. And then, slowly, he sat back down at his desk. "You could have told me this on the first day," he said. "You could have told me at breakfast. Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want it to make you doubt me," Emily said. "If I'd walked in and said Caldwell destroyed my family and I want revenge, you'd have wondered if I was seeing traitors that weren't there. You'd have wondered if my grief was reading fraud into clean numbers. So I stayed quiet, and I did the work, and I made sure every single thing I brought you was true before I brought it. The Michael Reynolds file has nothing to do with my father. That's clean. That's just the numbers. I made sure of it, because I knew that someday I'd have to sit across from you and prove I wasn't lying, and I wanted the proof to be bulletproof." Vincent studied her. "You know," he said slowly, "most people, when they find out the man who destroyed their family is within reach, they get reckless, they stop thinking, they charge." He tilted his head. "You got more careful. You built a case, you held your evidence and waited for the right moment." A pause. "You'd have made a very good version of what I am, Miss Parker, and I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." "I don't want to be what you are," Emily said honestly. "No offense." The corner of Vincent's mouth moved, almost a smile. "None taken," he said. Then the almost smile faded, and he was all business again. "All right, tell me how the trap works. Walk me through it, because if I'm going to spare a man who betrayed me, I need to know exactly what I'm getting in return." So Emily walked him through it. The plan was simple in shape and vicious in detail. They would catch Michael Reynolds first, not violently. They would gather the evidence, all of it, the payments, the leaks, the fingerprints, and they would put it in front of him in a room he couldn't walk out of, and they would let him understand fully and completely that he was finished, that Vincent knew everything, that the only question left was how the rest of his life went. And then they would offer him the one thing a cornered man can never resist, a way out. Michael would keep his channel to Caldwell open, but now, every piece of information that flowed through it would be information Emily and Vincent chose. They would use Michael to feed Caldwell a lie, a big one, the kind of lie Caldwell couldn't resist, the same way he'd built lies other men couldn't resist. They would dangle a deal in front of him, a distressed company, a fire sale, a bargain too good to be true, timed with a deadline too tight to think. They would build Caldwell the exact trap he'd spent his whole life building for other people. And when Caldwell reached out to take it, Emily would be waiting with the evidence to bury him, legally, on paper, in a courtroom. "There's a problem," Vincent said when she'd finished. "Michael, you're assuming he'll flip. You're assuming that when I corner him, he chooses to work for me instead of dying for Caldwell. But Michael's not stupid. He knows that the second he becomes a double agent, he's a dead man to both sides. Caldwell kills him if he finds out. I might kill him anyway when it's over. Why would he take that deal? Because of the third option, Emily said, which is, you let him go, Emily said. That's what I want you to offer him, not just his life, his freedom. Michael helps us take down Caldwell, and when it's over, he walks. He disappears. No revenge, no settling of scores later. He gets to start over somewhere new, clean, with his life. That's the offer. Because a man will do almost anything for a chance to live, but he'll do absolutely anything for a chance to start over. Vincent's jaw tightened. You're asking me to let a traitor walk free. I'm asking you to trade one man's punishment for the destruction of the man who's actually been hurting you, Emily said. Michael betrayed you, yes. But ask yourself why, Mr. Moretti. A man who took a bullet for you doesn't sell you out for nothing. Something happened. Someone got to him. Find out what it is before you decide he's beyond saving. She held his eyes. You told me betrayal is always the person you'd defend. So defend him, just long enough to understand him, and then decide. Vincent was quiet for a long time. Bring him to me, he said finally. Tomorrow, set it up. But Emily, his voice dropped, if he lies to me, if I see one flicker of the man who sold me for 2 years and doesn't regret it, then your plan is over and mine begins. Do you understand? I'll give him one chance, one. And you'd better hope your read on him is as good as your read on numbers. They brought Michael Reynolds in the next afternoon. He came without any idea of what was waiting. He walked into the conference room expecting a strategy meeting, and instead he found Vincent at the head of the table and Emily beside him, and Sandra Ellis by the door, and a thick folder sitting in the center of the table like a bomb. Michael was a big man, gray at the temples, with the easy confidence of someone who's been at the top of the food chain a long time. But Emily watched his face when he saw the folder, and she watched the confidence drain out of it in stages, like water leaving a cracked glass. What's this? Michael said. Sit down, Michael, Vincent said. Michael sat. Vincent nodded to Emily, and Emily opened the folder, and she began to lay it out, piece by piece, the way she'd laid out the contract at the Black Orchid 3 weeks earlier. The payments, the shell companies, the consulting fees that weren't consulting fees, the timing of every leak matched against Michael's access. She laid it out flat and clean and merciless, and she did not raise her voice because the numbers didn't need her to. And as she talked, she watched Michael Reynolds fall apart. Not all at once. First, there was denial in his eyes, the automatic reach for the lie. Then there was calculation, the search for a way out, an explanation, an angle. And then, as the evidence kept coming, as the folder kept opening, there was the thing Emily had been waiting for. The moment a man stops running because he understands there's nowhere left to run. Michael put his face in his hands. How long have you known? He said. His voice was muffled, broken. Long enough, Vincent said. Michael looked up, and Emily saw that his eyes were wet, and she understood in that moment that she'd been right about him. A man who felt nothing wouldn't cry. A man who'd sold his friend cleanly, coldly, for money, wouldn't have that look on his face. Whatever Michael Reynolds had done, it had been eating him alive. Vincent, Michael said, I need you to know. Don't, Vincent said. Don't you dare tell me you're sorry. I buried my mother next to you. I let you take a bullet meant for me, and I've spent 15 years feeling like I owed you my life, and the whole time you were selling me to the man who tried to put me in prison. His voice was shaking now, just slightly, the first crack Emily had seen in his control. So don't tell me you're sorry, Michael. Tell me why. You owe me that. Tell me why. And Michael Reynolds told him. It came out of him in a flood, the way things come out when a man has been holding them too long. It had started 3 years ago. Caldwell's people had come to him, not with an offer, but with a threat. They had something on Michael, something old, a mistake he'd made decades earlier, before Vincent's time, a thing he'd done when he was young and desperate that had gotten someone hurt. Caldwell had the proof, And Caldwell had told Michael that either he started providing information or the proof went to certain people, and Michael's family, his wife, his kids, his grandchildren, would learn exactly what kind of man he'd been. It was never about money, Michael said, and the tears were falling now, and he didn't try to hide them. I put the money in accounts I never touched. I couldn't touch it. It made me sick. It was never about money, Vincent. It was about my family. He was going to destroy my family. And I told myself I'd give him small things, useless things, nothing that could really hurt you. His voice broke completely, and then it got bigger and bigger, and I was in so deep I couldn't see the top anymore. And that deal, the $200 million deal, I swear to God, Vincent, I didn't know that was a trap. I didn't know he was going to use what I told him to try to destroy you. I thought I was just feeding him numbers. I didn't know. The room was silent. Vincent stared at his oldest friend for a long, long moment. And Emily watched the war happening behind his eyes, the fury and the grief and the 15 years of brotherhood all crashing against each other. "You should have come to me," Vincent said finally. His voice was raw. "Whatever it was, whatever you did back then, you should have come to me, and I would have handled it. I would have protected your family. That's what I do, Michael. That's the whole point of everything I've built. And you didn't trust me enough to let me help you. You trusted Caldwell's threat more than you trusted 15 years of me." "I know," Michael whispered. "I know. That's the thing I have to live with." And here Emily stepped in, because she could see that Vincent was on the edge, could see that his hand was hovering over the wrong choice, and she had promised to be the one who saw what he missed. "Michael," Emily said quietly, "look at me." He looked at her. "You have one chance to make this right," she said. "Not to erase it. You can't erase it, but to make it mean something. Caldwell used your fear to hurt the person you cared about. Now we're going to use his greed to end him. And when it's over, you get to walk away, and Caldwell can never threaten your family again, because Caldwell is going to be sitting in a cell where his threats don't reach anyone." She leaned forward. "You've been his weapon for 3 years. I'm offering you the chance to be the thing that takes him down instead. But you have to choose it right now with your whole heart. No more small betrayals, no more feeding two masters. You're either all the way in, or Vincent does what Vincent was about to do when I walked in this room. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Michael understood. He looked at Emily, and then he looked at Vincent, at the man he'd betrayed, and the man he'd apparently just been given a chance to save. "What do you need me to do?" Michael said. And that was the moment the trap began to close, not around Vincent, not around Emily, but around Richard Caldwell, who was sitting somewhere across the city right now, confident and rich, and certain he was the smartest man in every room, with no idea at all that the channel he'd been drinking from for 3 years had just been turned into a blade pointed straight at his throat. Over the next several days, they built it. Emily designed the lie with the precision of someone who had studied Caldwell's own methods and reflected them back at him. They would offer Caldwell a distressed shipping firm, a competitor to the one he'd tried to unload on Vincent, supposedly on the edge of bankruptcy, supposedly available at a fraction of its value. They dressed it up exactly the way Caldwell dressed up his own traps. Too good to be true, a tight deadline, a desperate seller, everything designed to trigger the greed that had made Caldwell rich. And Michael delivered it, through the same channel he'd used for 3 years, in the same voice Caldwell had learned to trust. The first message went out on a Tuesday, and then they waited, and Emily barely slept, because everything now depended on whether Richard Caldwell was as greedy as she believed he was, whether he would reach for the bait the way he'd spent his whole life making other men reach for his. For 3 days, nothing. And then, on the 4th day, Michael walked into Emily's office, with his face pale and his hands not quite steady, holding a phone. "He responded," Michael said. Emily's heart stopped. "He wants a meeting," Michael said. "He wants to see the company's books. He's interested." He swallowed. "Emily, he took the bait. Richard Caldwell just took the bait." And Emily Parker, the waitress who'd been invisible 6 weeks earlier, sat back in her chair and felt 2 years of grief and rage crystallize into a single, cold, perfect certainty. She had him. She had him. And that was exactly the moment Emily made herself slow down, because she knew this feeling. She'd felt it before, 2 years ago, watching her father chase the thing that would clear his name. The certainty, the rush, the voice that says you've won, when the truth is you haven't won anything yet. You've only gotten close enough to lose everything. Her father had trusted that feeling, and it had destroyed him. Emily was not going to make his mistake. "No," she said out loud, to the empty office, to herself. "Not yet. We don't have him yet. We have a meeting, that's all." Michael was still standing in the doorway with the phone in his hand, waiting for her to be happy, and when she wasn't, his face fell. "I thought you'd be glad," he said. "I am glad," Emily said. "I'm also scared. Sit down, Michael. We need to talk about what happens if this goes wrong, because a man like Caldwell doesn't survive as long as he has without knowing how to sniff out a trap. He's greedy, but he's not stupid. If any part of this feels wrong to him, he'll walk, and worse, he'll know someone came after him, and then he'll come after us. Do you understand? The second we spring this, there's no going back. If we miss, we don't get a second shot. We just get a war." Michael sat down heavily. "Then we don't miss," he said. "No," Emily said, "we don't." She took the plan to Vincent that afternoon, and she laid it out the way she laid out everything now, clean and complete, no gaps for a clever man to slip through. Caldwell wanted a meeting. He wanted to see the books of the distressed shipping firm they'd invented. So they would give him books, real-looking books, for a real-looking company, with real-looking distress baked into every page. Emily had spent 3 days building that company on paper, a company that existed nowhere but in the documents she'd constructed, and she'd built it the way a forger builds a masterpiece, because she knew exactly what an expert eye looked for, because she was an expert eye. "The books have to be perfect," she told Vincent. "Better than perfect, because Caldwell is going to look at them the way I looked at his contract. He's going to hunt for the lie, and when he doesn't find one, that's what's going to convince him it's real. The absence of the trap is the trap." Vincent nodded slowly. "And when he commits," he said, "when he actually moves to take the company?" "That's the whole game," Emily said. "It's not enough for Caldwell to be interested. Interest isn't a crime. We need him to act. We need him to do the thing he does, the thing that's actually illegal. We need him to move money through the same fraudulent channels he's always used, to structure the deal the same criminal way he structured every other deal, because that's what we can put in front of a prosecutor. We're not trapping him into wanting a bad company. We're giving him a stage, and we're letting him perform the exact crime he's been performing for years, except this time, every second of it is being documented." "Documented how?" Vincent said. "Legally. It has to hold up. If we gather this the wrong way, no prosecutor can touch it. And we've done all this for nothing." And here was where Emily had made her most important decision, and she knew Vincent might not like it. "Sandra," she said. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "What about her?" "She used to work for the federal government," Emily said. "She still has people there. People she trusts, people who'd love nothing more than to finally get Richard Caldwell after all these years, because I guarantee you, Mr. Moretti, we are not the first people to notice that Caldwell is a criminal. We're just the first ones with a way to catch him. Sandra's old colleagues have wanted him for a decade. They've never had the evidence. We're about to hand it to them on a plate." Vincent went very still. "You want to bring in the federal government," he said slowly, "into a plan run out of my company. My company, Ms. Parker. You understand what I am. You understand there are things in my history that do not survive federal attention." "I understand," Emily said, "which is why we do it carefully. We don't hand the government your company. We hand them Caldwell. Sandra brokers it. She goes to her old people, and she tells them she's got a live case against Richard Caldwell, and she offers them the evidence and the sting, and in exchange, they focus on Caldwell and only Caldwell. That's the deal. That's the wall we build. They get the man they've wanted for 10 years, and they don't go looking through your house to get him." She held his eyes. "It's a risk. I won't pretend it isn't. But it's the only way this ends with Caldwell in a courtroom instead of in a shallow grave, and you told me you wanted the light, Mr. Moretti. This is the light. It's just brighter than you expected." For a long time, Vincent said nothing. Emily could see the war in him again. The old instinct that said, keep the government as far from my door as humanly possible, fighting against the newer thing she'd been slowly building in him over the last 6 weeks, the thing that wanted to be more than what his family had been. If this goes wrong, Vincent said quietly, if Sandra's people decide Caldwell isn't enough, and they start pulling threads that lead back to me, I could lose everything. Not the company, everything. My freedom. The thing I almost lost the night you stopped me from signing that contract. I know, Emily said, and you're asking me to take that risk anyway. I'm asking you to trust me, Emily said. The same way you trusted me the night I told you the contract was fake. Everyone in that room told you it was safe, and you listened to me instead, and I was right. I'm asking you to listen to me again. I've thought about this from every angle. I've done nothing but think about it, and this is the way. Caldwell in a courtroom, your empire in the light, and a wall between the government and everything you're trying to leave behind. It's the hardest path. It's also the only one that gets you what you actually want. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. You know, he said, the first day I met you, I told you the rarest thing I'd ever seen was a person who wasn't afraid to tell me the truth. I was wrong. The rarest thing is a person who tells me the truth and is right and keeps being right over and over until I stop being able to imagine making a decision without them. He almost smiled. That's a dangerous thing to become to a man like me, Ms. Parker. You should be careful. I'll take my chances, Emily said. Bring Sandra in, Vincent said. Set it up. We do it your way. Then his face hardened. But I want a second wall, on top of yours. I want to know before Caldwell walks into that room that if it goes wrong, you and Sandra and Michael walk out clean. If this collapses, I take the fall alone. Not you. That's my condition. You built me the ladder out of the dark. I'm not going to let it fall on you. Emily hadn't expected that. It caught her somewhere she wasn't ready for. Why? She said. Why would you do that? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Because 6 weeks ago you were carrying coffee to survive, he said. And you looked at a table full of people who could ruin you. And you told the truth anyway, for a stranger, because it was the right thing to do. I've spent my whole life around people who only ever did the safe thing. You did the right thing when the right thing could have gotten you hurt. He met her eyes. I don't have many chances left to be the kind of man who protects people like that. I'm not going to waste this one. Emily didn't trust herself to answer that, so she just nodded, and she got to work. Sandra Ellis went to her old colleagues that week. Emily wasn't in the room for those conversations, but Sandra came back on Thursday with a look on her face that told Emily everything before she said a word. They want him, Sandra said. God, do they want him? I put the file in front of a friend of mine, a woman I trained under, and she went quiet for about a minute. And then she looked up at me and she said, Sandra, I have wanted this man for 11 years. I have a drawer at home with his name on it. Tell me this is real. Sandra's mouth twitched. I told her it was real. She's in, quietly, carefully, off the books until we have enough. But she's in, and she agreed to the wall. Caldwell only. She doesn't care about anything else. She just wants him. And you trust her, Emily said. With my life, Sandra said. I already have more than once. She's the real thing. If we deliver Caldwell, she'll take him all the way to a cell, and she won't go looking anywhere she promised not to look. Sandra paused, which means the only question left is whether we can actually deliver him. And that's on you and me and Michael. The government can't manufacture the crime. Caldwell has to commit it, in front of us, on the record. He will, Emily said. Greed doesn't know how to say no. That's the whole thing about Caldwell. He's spent his life making other men reach for something too good to be true. He's never once been on the other side of it. He doesn't know what it feels like. He doesn't know how to resist it, because he's never had to. She looked at the file on her desk, the fake company she'd built, the beautiful lie. We just have to make it irresistible enough. The meeting was set for 2 weeks out. And in those 2 weeks, Emily did something she hadn't planned to do, something she almost didn't let herself do, because she was afraid of what it would cost her focus. She went to see her father. He was in a care facility now, on the north side, a place Emily could barely afford, and paid for anyway, because it was the last thing she could do for him. The accusation 2 years ago hadn't just ended his career. It had ended something inside him, the shame of it, the injustice of it, the sheer helplessness of being an honest man, branded a criminal by people who wouldn't listen. It had broken something in his mind that the doctors couldn't fully name. Some days he knew her, some days he didn't. Today, he knew her. "Emily," he said when she came in. His voice was thin, but his eyes were clear. "You look different. You look like your old self." "I feel like my old self, Dad," Emily said, and she sat down beside him and took his hand. And for a while she just held it, because there weren't words yet for what she'd come to say. "You're working," her father said. "I can see it. You've got that look, the look you used to get when a set of books wouldn't behave, and you were going to make them behave." A weak smile. "Your mother always said you looked like a hunter when you did that. Where's the trail leading, Em?" Emily's throat tightened. "Dad," she said, "I found it. What happened to you? I found out what really happened." Her father went very still. "The fraud you found," Emily said. "The one they turned around and pinned on you. It was real, Dad. You were right. You found a crime, and they destroyed you to bury it, exactly like you always said. And I know who did it now. I know his name, and I'm going to make him pay for it. Not just for you, for all of it. But it started with you. It started with an honest man who couldn't let a lie sit." Her voice broke. "You taught me that. Everything I'm about to do, I learned from you." Her father's eyes had filled with tears. "They believed me," he whispered. "Somebody finally believed me." "I always believed you," Emily said. "Every single day. I never doubted you for 1 second, Dad. Not once." And her father, the honest accountant that the world had thrown away, put his hand against his daughter's face, and he said the thing that Emily would carry with her into the room with Caldwell, the thing that would steady her hand when everything else was shaking. "Then finish it," he said. "Whatever you're doing, whatever it costs you, finish it. Not with anger, Emily, with the truth. The truth is the only thing that outlasts a man like that. Bury him in the truth." Emily left the facility that day changed. The rage was still there, but it had gone quieter, colder, more useful. She wasn't chasing revenge anymore. She was finishing something her father had started 2 years ago, the thing that had cost him everything. She was going to complete his last honest act. The morning of the meeting, everything was in place. The fake company existed on paper, perfect down to the last false invoice. Sandra's federal contact was positioned, ready, with everything she needed to move the moment Caldwell committed the crime on the record. Michael had done his part, feeding Caldwell just enough over the past 2 weeks to make the man's greed catch fire. And Emily had built the room where it would all happen, wired and watched, every second of it captured, so that whatever Richard Caldwell did inside those walls would follow him for the rest of his life. There was only one problem. Caldwell wanted to meet Vincent. He'd insisted on it that morning through the channel, through Michael. He didn't want to deal with underlings. He wanted to sit across from Vincent Moretti himself, the man he'd tried and failed to destroy 6 weeks earlier. And Emily understood immediately what that meant. Caldwell knew. Not the whole plan, but he knew that the man he'd humiliated was somehow connected to this new deal, and instead of running from it, he wanted to look Vincent in the eye. It was ego. It was the arrogance of a man who'd never lost, who couldn't imagine losing, who wanted to savor beating the same opponent twice. "It's a risk," Emily told Vincent an hour before. "If you're in the room, he's watching you the whole time. If he reads anything on your face, anything at all, he'll know." "He won't read anything on my face," Vincent said. "I've spent 36 years making sure of that." "Mr. Moretti?" "Emily," he stopped her. 6 weeks ago, you walked into a room full of people who could destroy you, and you told the truth, and your hands were shaking the whole time, and you did it anyway. Now it's my turn. I'm going to sit across from the man who tried to take everything from me, the man who destroyed your family, and I'm going to smile at him, and I'm going to let him think he's winning, right up until the moment he isn't. I've been waiting 6 weeks for this. Let me have it." And there was something in his voice that Emily couldn't argue with, so she didn't. Richard Caldwell arrived at 11 in the morning. He walked in exactly the way Emily remembered, the expensive suit, the easy confidence, the smile that never reached the eyes. He shook Vincent's hand like they were old friends, like he hadn't tried to bury the man 6 weeks earlier, and he sat down across the table with the comfort of a predator who's never once been prey. "Vincent," he said, "I have to admit, when I heard you were behind this, I almost laughed. After our last meeting, I thought you'd want nothing to do with me, and yet here you are, bringing me a deal." His smile widened. "I like a man who doesn't let one bad night ruin a good business relationship." "Water under the bridge, Richard," Vincent said easily. "You had sloppy paperwork. It happens. This time, I'm the one selling, and I assure you my paperwork is very clean." Emily, sitting quietly to the side in the role of a junior analyst, watched Caldwell's eyes move across the room, and she watched him not recognize her. He didn't recognize her. 6 weeks ago, she'd been the waitress who'd blown up his $200 million deal, and he'd looked at her across a table with pure hatred, and now she was sitting 15 feet from him, and he didn't know her face. Because 6 weeks ago, she'd been the help, she'd been invisible, and a man like Caldwell didn't waste memory on the invisible. He'd looked right at the person who ruined him and filed her under nothing. It was the single most useful mistake he could have made. Emily kept her head down and her hands steady, and she thought, "You should have remembered me, Mr. Caldwell. That's going to be the thing that ends you. You looked at me and saw nothing, and nothing is exactly what's about to take you apart." Caldwell asked for the books. Emily slid them across the table, and then she watched Richard Caldwell do to her fake company exactly what she'd done to his real contract. He hunted. His eyes moved down the pages, fast and expert, looking for the lie, looking for the trap, looking for the thing that was too good to be true. Emily had spent 3 days building a company that could survive that exact scrutiny, and now she got to sit and watch the master she'd studied search for her fingerprints and fail to find them. Minute by minute, she watched his caution turn to interest, and his interest turn to hunger. The company was perfect. Distressed exactly the right amount. Undervalued exactly the way a real fire sale would be. Every document she'd forged was flawless because she'd built them the way only someone who could spot a forgery could build one. Caldwell looked for the knife, and the absence of the knife convinced him there wasn't one, and Emily watched greed close over his eyes like a curtain. "This is real," he said finally, half to himself. "This is actually real. This company is worth 3 times what you're asking." "The owner is desperate," Vincent said. "He needs to be out by the end of the month. He doesn't have time to find a fair buyer. That's your window, Richard. It closes fast." And there it was, the deadline, the tight window. The exact pressure Caldwell had used on Vincent 6 weeks ago turned around and pointed back at him. Emily almost couldn't breathe watching it. He was walking into his own trap step by step, and he had no idea, because he thought he was the only one in the world who knew how the trap worked. "I'll take it," Caldwell said. But Emily wasn't done. Interest wasn't enough. She needed the crime. "There's a complication with the structure," she said quietly, speaking up for the first time, keeping her voice flat and junior and forgettable. "The seller has some tax exposure. To make the numbers work at this price, the payment would need to be structured through a few intermediary entities, offshore. It's not entirely clean, technically. If that's a problem, we understand." She watched Caldwell's eyes light up, because that was his language. That was the exact criminal structure he'd used his whole life, and being asked to use it made him feel safe, made him feel at home, made him feel like these were his kind of people. "Not a problem at all," Caldwell said, with a smile that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. "I have entities for exactly that. I've done this 100 times. Let me walk you through how we'll structure it." And Richard Caldwell, on camera, on the record, in a wired room with a federal agent listening from 3 miles away, proceeded to lay out in complete detail the exact fraudulent, money-laundering, tax-evading structure that he had used to steal from a dozen families over a decade, including the family of the quiet young analyst sitting 15 feet away whose face he never bothered to remember. He explained the shell companies. He named the offshore accounts. He detailed how the money would move and how it would be hidden and how the paper trail would be broken. He did it proudly, expansively, the way a master shows off his craft, with no idea that every word was a nail in his own coffin. Emily sat perfectly still and let him bury himself in the truth, exactly like her father had told her to. It took 40 minutes. When Caldwell finally finished, when he'd laid the whole thing out and reached for a pen to begin the paperwork, Emily allowed herself one thing, one small thing. She looked up. She looked directly at Richard Caldwell, and she let him see her face fully for the first time, and she waited for the moment of recognition to arrive. It took a few seconds. She watched it happen. She watched his eyes catch on her and narrow and search, and then she watched the memory surface, the waitress, the coffee pot, the night his perfect deal came apart because some invisible girl looked at one page and said, "Don't sign." The color left Richard Caldwell's face. "You," he said. "Me," Emily said quietly. And in that instant, Emily watched the smartest man in every room he'd ever entered finally understand that he'd walked into a trap. She watched him replay the last 40 minutes in his head at lightning speed, watched him realize what he'd just said, and where, and to whom, watched the full horror of it land all at once. He'd been so busy being the predator that he'd never once considered he might be the prey. He'd looked at the invisible girl and seen nothing, and nothing had just taken him apart, piece by piece, exactly as she'd promised herself it would. "What is this?" Caldwell said, and his voice had lost every ounce of its smoothness. "What have you done? Who are you?" "My name is Emily Parker," Emily said. "You destroyed my father 2 years ago. He found one of your frauds, and you turned it around and pinned it on him, and it ended his life. And it put my mother in a hospital bed, and it took everything from my family." She stood up slowly. "You looked right at me 6 weeks ago, and you looked right at me 40 minutes ago, and both times you saw nothing. You should have remembered my face, Mr. Caldwell, because I remembered yours. And I just spent the last 40 minutes letting you confess to everything you've ever done, on the record, to people who have wanted you for 11 years. Caldwell shot to his feet. "This won't hold," he snarled. "Whatever you think you have, entrapment, coercion, my lawyers will tear it apart. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You have no idea what I can—" "Sit down, Richard," Vincent said. And there was something in Vincent's voice, finally uncovered, the cold thing he'd been hiding behind the easy smile for the last hour, that made even Richard Caldwell go silent. "You wanted to meet me," Vincent said, "because you wanted to beat me twice. Because your ego couldn't stand that a waitress made a fool of you in my dining room. So you walked all the way back into the same room, past the same woman, and you did it again. You put the noose around your own neck because you couldn't imagine anyone in this room was smarter than you." Vincent's eyes were flat and terrible. "She's smarter than you, Richard. She's smarter than everyone I pay to be smart. And she just handed you to the federal government wrapped in a bow. There's nothing your lawyers can tear apart because you didn't get tricked into anything. You did what you always do. You just did it in front of the wrong people for once." The door opened, and Sandra Ellis walked in, and behind her walked a woman Emily had never met, a federal agent with 11 years of wanting written all over her face, and a drawer at home with Richard Caldwell's name on it that was finally, after more than a decade, about to be emptied. "Richard Caldwell," the woman said, and her voice was steady and calm and full of something that had waited a very long time. "I've been looking forward to this for 11 years. Emily watched them take him. She watched the man who had destroyed her family, who had ended her father's life, who had looked at her twice and seen nothing, be walked out of the room with his hands behind his back and his empire crumbling behind him. And she waited to feel triumph, waited for the rush, the victory, the sense of having won. But that wasn't what she felt. What she felt, standing in that quiet room with her father's words in her ears, was something closer to peace. She hadn't buried Caldwell in anger. She'd buried him in the truth. She'd finished the honest act her father had started 2 years ago, the act that had cost him everything, and she'd finished it his way, with the numbers, with the truth, with the one thing that outlasts a man like that. Vincent came to stand beside her as the room emptied. "It's done," he said quietly. "It's done," Emily agreed. "How does it feel?" Emily thought about it. She thought about her father, clear-eyed for once, saying somebody finally believed me. She thought about her mother. She thought about 2 years of carrying coffee and being invisible. "It feels like the beginning," she said. "Not the end. I thought this would be the end of something. But it feels like the beginning of something instead." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. "It is," he said. "Believe me, Miss Parker, it is. It was the beginning, and the months that followed proved Vincent right in ways Emily hadn't expected. The arrest of Richard Caldwell did not happen quietly. A man that rich, that connected, does not go down without the whole world noticing. His empire came apart in public, piece by piece, and every piece that fell revealed another family he'd ruined, another company he'd hollowed out, another life he'd destroyed to feed his own greed. The federal agent who'd waited 11 years finally emptied her drawer, and what came out of it filled newspapers for weeks. But Emily didn't follow the headlines. She followed the one thing that mattered to her. Her father's case was reopened. It happened because of the evidence Emily had gathered, the thread she'd pulled that led back through Caldwell's crimes to the fraud her father had discovered 2 years earlier. Once investigators started pulling Caldwell's operation apart, the truth of what had been done to an honest accountant on the north side of Chicago came out into the light, and it could not be pushed back into the dark. Emily was in her father's room the day the letter came. She read it to him twice, because the first time neither of them could quite believe it. His conviction was vacated. His name was cleared. The state acknowledged, in careful legal language that Emily would keep in a frame for the rest of her life, that her father had been wrongly accused, that he had in fact discovered a crime rather than committed one, and that the record would be corrected. Her father was quiet for a long time after she finished. "Read me the part again," he said, "the part where they say I was right." Emily read it again. And her father, the man the world had thrown away, the man who'd spent 2 years in a fog of shame that had eaten his mind, closed his eyes, and 2 tears ran down his face. And he said, I told them for 2 years, and nobody listened." "I listened," Emily said, holding his hand. "And now everybody has to listen, Dad. It's on paper, it's official. You were right, and everybody knows it now." "You did this," her father said. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and for that moment, he was completely clear, completely present, completely himself. "My girl, you did this. You did this," Emily said. 2 years ago, you found the crime. You couldn't let the lie sit. I just finished what you started." Her father smiled, and it was the smile she remembered from before everything fell apart, the smile of the man who'd taught her that numbers don't lie. "Then we did it together," he said. And that was enough. That was everything. Emily had walked into the Black Orchid 3 months earlier as a waitress who thought her only job was to become invisible, and now she sat beside her father with his name cleared. And she understood that the invisible girl had done something the powerful people at that table could never have done. She'd refused to let a lie stand, and it had changed everything. Her father's health didn't magically recover. The mind doesn't heal that fast, and the doctors were honest with her about that. But something shifted in him after that day. The shame that had been crushing him lifted, and in its place came something Emily hadn't seen in 2 years. Peace. He had good days now, more of them, and on the good days he'd ask her about her work, about the numbers, about the trail she was hunting, and his eyes would light up the way they used to. And Emily had plenty to tell him because her work had changed too. Vincent's empire, over those months, transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the man he'd been before Emily walked into that dining room. The betrayal by Michael Reynolds had shaken loose something deeper in Vincent, a willingness to look hard at everything he'd built and ask what deserved to survive. And with Emily leading internal investigations, the answer to that question kept coming back the same. The illegal operations, the things his family had done in the dark for generations, one by one, Vincent let them go. It wasn't easy. Emily watched it cost him. There were men who'd worked for the Moretti family for decades who didn't want the world to change, and some of them didn't leave quietly. But Vincent held the line, and Emily held it with him, and slowly the company became the thing Vincent had told her over breakfast he wanted it to be. Clean, legal, something that could survive in the light. Within a year, the Moretti Logistics Company was one of the fastest-growing legitimate shipping corporations in America. The very future Caldwell had tried to steal with a forged contract, Vincent built for real, honestly, with Emily's fingerprints on every safeguard that kept it clean. And Michael Reynolds walked away, exactly as Emily had promised him he could. It was one of the hardest conversations Vincent ever had, Emily knew. The last meeting between the two men who'd come up together, who'd buried Vincent's mother side by side, who'd shared a bullet and 15 years of brotherhood before it all came apart. Emily wasn't in the room, but Vincent told her about it afterward, in his quiet way. "I let him go," Vincent said. "I gave him what you said, his freedom, a chance to start over. He's taking his family somewhere new, somewhere Caldwell's shadow can't reach, and I told him I never wanted to see him again." Vincent was silent for a moment, and then, at the door, he turned around and he said, "Thank you for being a better man than I was." And I told him the truth. I told him I wasn't a better man a year ago. I told him the reason I could let him walk instead of putting him in the ground was standing in an office down the hall, and her name was Emily Parker. Emily didn't know what to say to that. "You changed me," Vincent said simply. "The night you told me not to sign, I thought you'd saved me $200 million. It took me months to understand you'd saved me from something much bigger. You saved me from staying the man I was." Emily had spent her whole life around numbers, and numbers she always knew what to do with. But she never quite knew what to do with a thing like that, said plainly by a man like Vincent Moretti. So she just nodded, and she got back to work, because work was the language they both understood best. But the question that had haunted her since the beginning never fully went away. Late at night, in her office with the city spread out beneath her, Emily would sometimes catch herself asking it. Why me? Out of everyone in the world, why had it been a waitress carrying coffee who saw what 20 experts missed? Why had the thread led back to her own family? Why had she, of all people, been the one standing in that room at that exact moment with the exact gift needed to stop a catastrophe? She didn't have an answer, and maybe she decided there wasn't one. Maybe some things weren't a plan. Maybe they were just a girl who couldn't let a lie sit, standing in the right room at the right time, choosing to speak instead of stay silent. Nearly a year after the night that changed everything, Vincent asked Emily to have dinner with him. He didn't tell her where. He just sent the car, the same black car that had waited outside her apartment the morning after the Black Orchid, and Emily got in without asking questions, because she'd learned that Vincent did things for reasons, and the reasons were usually worth waiting for. The car took her to the Black Orchid. Emily understood the moment they pulled up. Of course, the same restaurant, the same place where she'd been invisible, where she'd poured coffee for people who didn't see her, where she'd looked at one page of a contract and changed the entire course of her life. But this time, she didn't walk in through the service entrance. This time, she wasn't wearing a uniform. She walked in through the front door in an elegant dress, and the manager who'd once grabbed her by the elbow and hissed at her to keep her mouth shut nearly tripped over himself, showing her to the table. Vincent was waiting in the same private dining room, the room where it had all started, where 20 experts had told him the deal was perfect and one waitress had told him it was a trap. "I thought this was the right place," Vincent said, standing as she came in, to finish the story properly. Emily sat down across from him, in the same room, at the same table, and the strangeness of it settled over her. A year ago, she'd stood in this room terrified, a coffee pot shaking in her hands, about to throw away her invisibility on a stranger. Now she sat at the table as an equal. "Finish it how?" she said. Vincent placed a folder on the table in front of her. For one strange moment, it looked exactly like the night of the contract, a document sliding across the table, a decision waiting. But this was different. Emily could feel it was different. "Open it," Vincent said. She opened it. Inside was a deed, ownership documents, and it took Emily a moment to understand what she was looking at, because her mind refused to accept it at first. It was the deed to the Black Orchid. The restaurant itself, the building, the business, and her name was on it. Emily looked up, stunned. "Vincent, I can't—" "You can," Vincent said. "Listen to me. A year ago, you stood in this room, and every person here looked right through you. You were invisible to them, the help. Nothing. And in the one place where nobody saw your value, you did the single most valuable thing anyone had done for me in 15 years. His voice was quiet and certain. "You gave me a chance when nobody saw you. You told me the truth when the truth could have cost you everything. You believed in doing the right thing before anyone in my world had ever shown me it was possible." He nodded toward the deed. "Now I want you to own the place where everyone ignored your value. I want the room where they made you invisible to belong to you." Emily looked down at the deed, at her own name printed there, and something in her chest broke open. She thought about the double shifts, the exhaustion, the way she'd trained herself to disappear so the wealthy people wouldn't have to see the human being pouring their coffee. "I spent 11 months in this building making myself invisible," she said quietly, "because that's what they wanted. That's what the job was. Disappear. And now the building is yours," Vincent said, "and you'll never have to disappear again." Emily was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said. "If they'd seen me that night, none of this happens. If I hadn't been invisible, I wouldn't have been in this room. A visible person, an important person, doesn't get sent in to refill coffee for the most important meeting in the city. They sent me because I was nobody, because I didn't matter." She almost laughed. "The only reason I was standing close enough to read that contract was that they thought I was beneath noticing. My whole life changed because I was invisible in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time." Vincent tilted his head. "Then maybe being invisible was never the curse you thought it was," he said. "Maybe it was just waiting to become the thing that saved us both." Emily closed the folder gently. "I'll take it," she said, "but I'm changing it. This place. It's not going to be a room where important people ignore the help anymore. I'm going to run it differently. The people who carry the trays here are going to know they're seen. Every single one of them." She looked at him. "Because somewhere out there is another girl carrying coffee who's got a gift nobody's noticed. And I want her to know that the person pouring your coffee might just be the smartest person in the room." Vincent smiled, the real smile, the one he'd first shown her the day he offered her the job. "That," he said, "is exactly why I gave it to you." They talked for a long time that night, in the room where it had all begun, and at some point, Emily realized that the question that had haunted her for a year, "Why me?" had finally stopped mattering. The answer wasn't important anymore. What was important was what she'd done with it. She had been overlooked, and she'd become the person who saved an empire. She had been silenced, and she'd become the voice that couldn't be silenced. She had been invisible, and she'd made herself impossible to ignore. And the man who destroyed her father, the billionaire who'd looked right through her twice and seen nothing, was sitting in a cell where his money couldn't reach and his lawyers couldn't save him, buried in the truth exactly as her father had told her he should be. As the evening wound down, Emily thought about the sentence. The one sentence that had started all of it. 2 words, really. "Don't sign." She'd almost not said them. She'd taken a full step toward the door. She'd told herself, "This is not my problem," and she'd nearly walked out and let a stranger destroy himself, and let a liar win one more time. But she hadn't. She'd turned around. She'd spoken. And everything, every single thing that mattered in her life now, her father's cleared name, her mother's peace, her own future, Vincent's transformation, Caldwell's downfall, all of it traced back to that one moment when a frightened waitress decided that the truth was worth more than her own safety. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said as the night grew late. "Anything," Vincent said. "That night, when I said don't sign, if I'd been wrong, if I'd made a fool of myself in front of 20 of the most powerful people in the city and the contract had turned out to be fine, what would you have done?" Vincent considered it. "Honestly," he said, "I probably would have had you thrown out and never thought about you again." He paused. "But here's the thing, Emily. You weren't thinking about what would happen to you if you were wrong. You were thinking about what would happen to me if you were right. That's the difference between you and almost everyone I've ever known. They calculate the cost to themselves before they speak. You calculated the cost to a stranger." He shook his head. "That kind of courage can't be bought. I've tried. It has to be a person's nature, and it's yours." Emily sat with that. "My father used to say something," she said. "He said the truth is the only thing that outlasts a man like Caldwell. Bury him in the truth, he told me, and I did. But I've been thinking about it, and I don't think that's the whole lesson." She looked at Vincent. "I think the real lesson is that the truth doesn't matter if nobody's brave enough to say it. My father saw the truth 2 years ago, and it destroyed him because when he tried to speak it, everyone stayed silent, and the silence swallowed him. The truth alone didn't save him. It took someone willing to stand up and say it out loud, in a room full of people who didn't want to hear it, for the truth to finally win. Vincent was quiet, listening. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" Emily said. "It's not enough to see. You have to speak. 20 experts saw those numbers that night and said nothing, because saying something felt too risky, felt too much like sticking their necks out. And I was a waitress with everything to lose and nothing to gain, and I'm the one who spoke. Not because I was braver than them, because I was the only one who understood that staying silent has a cost too. My father paid it. I watched him pay it for 2 years. I was never going to let anyone else pay it if I could stop it." She looked around the room where it had all begun. "Money didn't save you that night, Vincent," she said. "You had all the money in the world, 20 experts, millions in advice. None of it saved you. Power didn't save you. Fear didn't save you. The only thing that saved you was one person who was willing to speak when everyone else stayed silent." She smiled. "And I think that's worth more than any empire. The courage to say the one sentence nobody else will say." Vincent Moretti looked at the woman across the table, the waitress who had become the most trusted person in his world, the invisible girl who had saved his empire, his freedom, and, though he would never quite have the words for it, his soul. "You're right," he said. "You usually are." Emily Parker had walked into that room a year ago as a woman the whole world overlooked. She walked out of it that night as the woman who owned it. And she had learned the single most important truth there is, the one her father had taught her, and she had finally understood completely. The greatest weapon in the world is not money. It is not power. It is not fear. It is the courage to speak when everyone else stays silent. And one sentence from a waitress no one bothered to see had changed everything.